Hello, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachael for the 21st of June. Here in Canada, today marks the National Indigenous Peoples Day, and it is an opportunity for Canadians to think about our history and to learn more about the Indigenous populations of this country. Some of you may not be aware of this, but we have, within the Indigenous population of our country, we have our Aboriginal folk, those who have traditionally, some people may have think of them as like Native Canadians from Americans or Native Americans, but in Canada we call them our Indigenous people or Aboriginals. We also have the Inuit with the people from the north, and we have the Métis population, all members of our Indigenous peoples. And over the last several years, Canada has been trying very, very hard to acknowledge what our government and the colonial institutions, both sponsored by the government and by churches and by businesses like the Hudson's Bay Company and Northwest Company, things like that, contributed to removing, in some cases, it was an active, intentional thing to remove the culture from our Indigenous peoples, and in some cases it just sort of happened. I don't think there was any ill intent on the part of some people, although we do have history, documentation, and proof that in some cases, in many, many cases, this was an actual intentional thing, that we're trying to remove the Indian from the Indian. It is a shameful part of our history, but it is a part of our history, and because of that, we are acknowledging that, and we are doing our level best to work toward that, toward recognition and reconciliation. Many years ago, the country struck a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which went across the country and invited people, Indigenous peoples, who had been at residential schools to come forward to share their stories, to tell their truth, to speak what was on their hearts. And in case after case after case, such incredible pain was observed, and recognition that this pain, this trauma, has become generational trauma, that the generations after the ones who were in residential schools themselves have passed on that trauma to their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And we as Canadians need to help to bring healing where we can. And so the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came up with 94 calls to action. And some of those are things that people can do on their own or participate with through their societies or their workplaces or through the churches and institutions. Some of those are things like education and learning about culture and acknowledging what we have done. In my own churches, last fall, we participated in a video study that a video series that the Anglican Church of Canada put together many years ago, and it told the story of the Indigenous peoples of Canada from their perspective, from sort of the beginning, before we all were here, all us colonial people were here, right up to and including when it was being filmed. And it shared the work that was being done, in particular at the end, toward the end of the video, was about the work that being done within the Anglican Church of Canada and how we are working toward reconciliation and not allowing, but encouraging the Indigenous peoples to have a voice within our church. And it's a tough haul. As everybody knows, we've been doing Anglican Church for 500 plus years, and we move very slowly. We don't make changes quickly. And so when our Indigenous siblings come to us and say, well, this is our way of being Anglican, and we would like to be self-governing, we would like to do this and this and this, and we would like to not do this and this, and we'd like to share with you in this, but not share with you in that. It's jarring because we're used to this. And it's a learning process for people like me and colonial people who are trying to recognize that just because it's our history and what we are comfortable with doesn't make it the only history and doesn't mean that everyone should be comfortable with it. And as a matter of fact, maybe we shouldn't be comfortable with it. So a lot of growing and truth telling and truth listening has to happen. And so this day, our country acknowledges this day. Kids at school will wear orange shirts. There will be stories told and games played and maybe even food eaten that will be celebration of Indigenous peoples in this land, and their grace in sharing this land with us, the stories that they can teach us about this land and how we might better use this land. One of the ways that the Anglican Church anyway, is participating, is that we have all been called to find ways that we might intentionally reach out to our Indigenous siblings and to enter into relationship with them. And that does not mean we go in and we talk and teach about what we do, but it means we go together and we listen and we learn from each other. And in particular for the white church, the Anglican Church that looks like me, that means that we're going to have to spend a lot of time going and listening and watching and learning how the different culture and the different cultures, because there is not one specific Indigenous culture, there are many, many different groups of Indigenous peoples, and they each carry with them their own story, their own way of doing things, their own way of looking at the world and speaking about the world, their own way of praying. And the Anglican Communion, the Anglican Church, has this openness, if we're willing to use that openness, acknowledge it, into finding ways to bring those stories together. And this past Sunday, if you watched the We Parish mini worship, you'll know that we gathered, my churches gathered with St. Saviour's Vermilion and went up to Frog Lake, First Nation, and we gathered with the people of Church of the Nativity, the Anglican peoples of Church of the Nativity there, and their lay reader, Fred Matthews, who is an Indigenous person, and he's working toward becoming a priest, and is a joy to work with, and I look forward to working with him as a colleague. But we went up there and we had a Eucharist, and it looked very Anglican. There were aspects of it that were a little bit different. The Eucharistic prayer included having dried cranberries, which reminded us with the wine of the sweet and the sour of life, that God is with us in all of it. We had bannock bread broken rather than our little wafers that look like paper that we normally would have on a Sunday. There's something very real about having bread that looks like bread for the Eucharist. It was very powerful. And because I'm ordained, I was invited to celebrate the Eucharist, but it was Fred's parish, his community, so he led the rest of the worship, including a traditional story and then reading from the Indigenous translation of the Gospel of John. And it was so powerful to hear the same words that we've heard so many times over and over, but to hear them spoken from a different perspective, hearing them spoken with different words, different names attached, which is jarring enough to stop us in our tracks and say, listen, hear it anew. Hear the same old thing from a new way, because it gives us new insights. And that's one of the gifts of this Indigenous Peoples Day, is that we are given the opportunity to stop in our tracks and to listen and learn something we maybe haven't learned before. And I was given an incredibly beautiful gift. Me and Joanne and Darla were each given a gift that has, I cannot explain. I haven't got words to explain how powerful this gift is. But we were each given, and ours are each different looking, ribbon skirts that we would wear then for gatherings at Indigenous gatherings and times like this. So today, when I go to my retirement home service at Points West for the ecumenical service, I'll be wearing my new ribbon skirt. I have wanted to have a ribbon skirt since last September, when I participated in the 7 Cree teachings in Edmonton. But it was important to me that I not just go out and buy one, or that I go out and have one made for myself, because it was important to me that it had meaning, and that it not just be me thinking, isn't that a cool Indigenous thing that I can share and participate in. I wanted to, if I was going to have my own made, I wanted to have the teachings. I wanted someone to be able to teach me about what a ribbon skirt is and what they represent and what it's all about, or to be presented with one that would be a gift, an honor given to me. And on Sunday, one of the elders instructed, I believe it was her granddaughter, to share these with us. And it was so incredibly humbling that the hands of this young woman had prepared this ribbon skirt, not knowing who it would be given to, but allowing me, as a child of God and as a sister in creation, to be privileged to have this beautiful ribbon skirt and the ability and the gift of being able to wear it and to honor the women of the indigenous parts of our country when I do so. I know that I don't know anything about it, but I look forward to learning. And I hope that that is indeed what this day will be for all Canadians. A day when we, who are not Indigenous, acknowledge how much we don't know, but also anticipate the joy and the excitement of all that we have to learn. And so to my siblings, my Indigenous siblings, may this day be a day that brings you peace and hope. May it lead us to true reconciliation. And to all my siblings of the colonial background, may we walk humbly on this land. May we listen to the stories told by the elders of our Indigenous peoples. And may we recognize that ours is not to own. Ours is to share. Ours is to learn. Ours is to be humble and to walk gently and to do justice with our Indigenous siblings, for them and for one another. Micah 6, prophet of Micah chapter 6, verse 8. To walk to love, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God. There is nothing, I think, that is more appropriate for this day, this Indigenous Peoples Day, than that passage from Scripture. I pray that I may do that this day and always, and that we may learn as Canadians, Indigenous, and those who came to this soil, that we might together learn to walk that way toward true reconciliation, justice, and peace. Have a great day, and God bless you all. I'll see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachael.